having them is not sufficient if the opponents are still at a much higher level than those of those heritage players or naturalized players that they have gotten. It still requires the local bonds, the local football ecosystem to push the whole thing up. Like how Arif Aiman feels very challenged and motivated to play because of these quality net foreign born players in front of him, that he's able to thread those passes to the players who can read what he's thinking, what he's trying to do, and how they're going to move. And this is where this revolution, Harimau Malaya revolution, is going on. We may see a similar path going on ahead, where perhaps you can see Southeast Asian national teams pushing closer and putting up very fierce competitions, not just against your fellow regional opponents, but also against other sub-confederations like South Asia and particularly in the Middle East. In what was supposed to be a cliffhanger between two of Southeast Asia's more prominent national teams, turns out into a second half one-sided affair as Malaysia, aided by 5 new naturalized players, demolished Vietnam by 4 clear goals without reply in the second AFC Asian Cup Group F qualifying match held at Bukit Jalil National Stadium earlier this evening. And with 2 wins out of 2, Malaysia are now in pole position. Even though there are still 4 more games to play, they're in a strong position to qualify for a second successive Asian Cup finals after their creditable campaign in Qatar in the 2023 edition. And prior to the game, a lot of speculation was around the rather mysterious newcomers in the Malaysian national team, which eventually 5 naturalized players were included in the final 23-man squad, with 4 of them: Facundo Gomez, Argentinian-born, Facundo Gaques, Argentinian-born centre-back. He's joined by another Spanish centre-back, John Irazabal, and up front, Arif Aiman was paired on the right of a 3-man attack with Rodrigo Holgado, of also Argentinian-born, as centre forward, with another Brazilian-born left winger, João Figueiredo, playing on the left side. And one of the more particularly curious aspects on the lineup that Klemoski put up in what was poised to be a do-or-die game in this phase of Asian Cup qualifying for Saudi Arabia 2027 is keeping Dion Kus at right wing back in his attacking 5-2-3 formation. And as it turns out, this particular decision proved to be more than inspired. I mean, let's put it this way. Back in the opening qualifying round 3 game, when Malaysia comfortably defeated Nepal 2-0, and Nepal, they were, in all respects, they are minors in the continental scene. So playing Dion Kus at right wing back and him enjoying much of the game on the other side of the pitch rather than in defense was a refreshing change for once. But I admit, it wasn't expected that Dion Kus would keep that position, which is admittedly his natural position, in the same role against Vietnam, who are the reigning Southeast Asian champions after winning the ASEAN Championships last year. And Vietnam put up a rather strong squad despite missing Rafaelson, who is still out with a long-term injury, and Yuan Quang Hai on the bench. They themselves have 2 naturalized players on the pitch in the starting 11, Philip Nguyen, Czech-born goalkeeper, and another new recruit, Pendets. Yeah, the Vietnamese team, I forget. Yes, the rather tall French-born centre-back or Brazilian-born centre-back, in defense, and his main role was to attempt to keep up Arif Aiman. So, with that rather intriguing clash where Malaysia have 4 newcomers all making their debuts, and with Vietnam having a largely recognized squad but with 1 debutant, it's admittedly quite jittery in the opening proceedings, as in particular Malaysia, they struggled to figure out where their teammates were, and in the first 30 minutes there were at least a couple of occasions where you see 2 yellow shirts going after the same ball at the same time, once in defense, and another occasion where Holgado and Figueiredo also going for the same ball at aerial duel off a cross in attack. Rather comical in a way, but as the minutes went by, once the game settled down, it was Malaysia who began to show a little more of the impetus, and I think that the first of what was probably the turning of the tide in favor of Malaysia came when Leong Koo, yes, the same player who was unveiled as the new Cerezo Osaka signing just over the weekend, and he came back from Japan thereafter. He made a very vital contribution to this game that could be seen as the game's gradually swinging towards Malaysia's favor. I mean, aided by teammates who were probably of his level or equivalent from his early playing days back in Europe, Leong Koo produced a stunning shot from outside the box that struck the post. And had that got in, that could have been the opener, but that ferocious shot actually probably signaled something on what was to come, because once Malaysia came close with that shot that hit the post, it was, I think, a gradual ascension of what was to come in the second half, where Figueiredo, who was until then struggling to figure out where his best role on the pitch is, he came really close as well 4 minutes later after that Koo's shot. In the 40th minute, when he actually forced an acrobatic save of Philipp Nguyen after meeting a cross inside the box. With just only Philipp Nguyen to beat, and Philipp had to be at his best to produce that save, otherwise it would have been a certain goal. And again, yes, the ball-headed João Figueiredo, he was getting more and more involved in the game from the left side, getting very involved in his runs and positioning inside the final third. He himself laid a very long diagonal cross to Arif Aiman, one of the only 2 local born players in the starting 11, the other being the goalkeeper Shihan Azmi. Well, so Arif, he beat the Vietnamese defender to the ball, raced forward alone, and again Philipp Nguyen had to come in to make that save. I mean, if we look at it a little bit from the Vietnamese perspective, what if it had been the Vietnamese goalkeeper? Would he have reacted with the same kind of reflexes that the Czech-born shot stopper did? That could have been a little bit questionable, but after coming close when the first half ended goalless, it was probably in the second half that's when the floodgates really opened. Yeah. And all that while, Shihan actually didn't have much to do. The 3-man centre-back pairing of Captain Matthew Davis on the right centre-back role, Irazabal in the middle, and Irazabal on the left centre-back, and Facundo Gades in the middle of the trio. They were quite a solid pairing, and the 2 newcomers at the back adjusted very, very early and got into the thick of action. I think it was their commanding presence, in particular inside their area, that frustrated Vietnam a lot, because Vietnam were hoping to produce the same kind of nippy play that would have caused problems for past national teams of Malaysia in the past. But for the first time in a long while, Vietnam could not find an answer, could not find a pass that would pierce open the Malaysian defense. Not that it was that watertight, but Shihan really had nothing to do. The 2 newcomers at the back were solid, and the Vietnamese were left scratching their heads on what what more could they do? And it's admittedly in the first 45 minutes where Malaysia was still trying to figure out who to communicate with who and how they're going to position themselves relative to their teammates, in depending on whether they're in defense or transition or going forward into the final third through the counters or through those decisive splitting pass, according to what Malaysian Harimau Malaya national coach Peter Klemoski has prepared for the squad. But the Tigers really came to life after the break. It's like 3 minutes into the second half, and Figueiredo really, who was already threatening to score late in the first half, finally got the goal he deserved. Admittedly stealing the ball in the center circle, he went on one solo run before forcing the retreating Vietnamese defense to keep backpedaling until he found that space to slot past Philip. And that was the opening of what was to come in what eventually became a very dominant second half performance. One-sided even, so to speak, because for the rest of the way, it's really just Malaysia enjoying that rare moment where they felt so confident in their play all of a sudden after feeling quite lost for extensive periods early in the first half. And with Arif and Figueiredo now in tandem with each other, Holgado is still trying to figure out where his best role was. The duo came close to scoring the second just 2 minutes after the opening goal. Once again, the Vietnamese defense was suddenly feeling very flat-footed. They were caught up by the enterprising runs of the bald-headed striker, Brazilian-born striker, and Arif Aiman at his usual best in his favourite right-wing position. And it was like Arif being denied once, but Philip had to come again to block Figueiredo from scoring the second, because Vietnam must admit, if not for the Czech-born goalkeeper, that defeat could have been worse, a lot worse. But still that moment, that the Harimau Malaya momentum kept going as they kept pushing forward, probing the rather increasingly shaky Vietnamese defense, the rather puzzled Vietnamese players who were unsure what had hit them, like a bulldozer just slamming straight at them. That's the most apt way to describe how Harimau Malaya overcame that halftime deadlock to win 4-0 at the final whistle. And with Vietnam increasingly unsure and Kim Sang-sik looking increasingly puzzled on what is happening in front of them. The Vietnamese were all puzzled. They weren't sure what they were supposed to be doing. They were confused by the positioning and the movement of the Malaysian players. A large part, I think, it's a lot more to what Klemoski has planned. You can put all these players together, but without a precise planning and direction from the head coach, it is not going to go anywhere. Even if you can put 10 Messis or 10 naturalized Cristiano Ronaldos, it's not going to make a difference without a coherent plan. But it took a while. One by one, all these new recruits began to show what they could do. The defenders adapted quickly. Figueiredo finally got his rhythm going early in the second half. And before we knew it, the fourth new recruit, Holgado, who was for much of the first half, he was bumbling around and struggling to find his footing up front, and even got into a head clash with a Vietnamese that required bandaging on his head. He was the one who scored the second goal, showing that his ability to find that little gap inside the box to pounce with his finishing, that is quite vital at a rather high international level, like in the final round of Asian Cup qualifyings. Once again, Arif Aiman was the guy who provided the assist. He set it up, another low another low cross, and Hogaro was there to finish. And I mean, while Bukit Jalil was erupting, the Vietnamese players were suddenly left stunned, more aptly stunned. So, and by then Kim Sang-sik had no choice but to throw in Quang Hai. But still, it didn't really change much. Sihan still had nothing much to do. The defense was very comfortable. Yong Kus was enjoying himself a lot at the other end of the pitch against Vietnam. And that's where I think the huge credit should be given to Klemoski for giving the experienced defender, who is better known for his defensive solidity as a centre-back for the Tigers previously. Now he has transformed under Klemos, the Australian head coach, into a potent attacking force. Already hitting the post once with a thunderous shot. That was Malaysia's first real attempt at goal of the game. He went on to provide vital contributions, especially when it came to the third goal on the 67th minute. For it was not on the right there where he started, it was down the middle. From the middle where he actually started the move that led to him feeding the ball to Arif on the right. And Arif, once again, you can say for the second assist of the game, he fed the ball for Laver Corbin Ong, the JDT fullback, to score his second goal of this Asian Cup qualifying campaign, after he scored one in similar fashion against Nepal. 3-0, done and dusted. By then, the Vietnamese were beyond stunned. They were completely shell-shocked, in disbelief. Utter disbelief at what Klemoski has managed to do, not just with just those 4 new imports, 4 new naturalized players, but also the revelation in having Yong Kus as a potent attacking force in midfield and on the right wing, not just against minors like Nepal, but even in the bigger games like against the Southeast Asian champions. That is one of the biggest aspects in how the game plan has evolved for Harimau Malaya under Klemoski, and it's quite evident that beyond the 4 new recruits, Yong Kus is one of the biggest beneficiaries in this new system under the Australian in this current Harimau Malaya revolution. And if we thought it's already all over, but credit to the home team, they never gave up. They still kept going, and they went on to record their biggest victory ever against Vietnam ever since official records began, to register their 6th win overall over their opponents, and also their biggest victory over the Golden Dragons ever since their first win in more than 10 years, ever since their 4-2 win in away in the second leg of the ASEAN Championships in 2014. Yeah, but this win is so comprehensive. By the time Yong Kus, he became from contributor, he became the scorer when he actually headed home the 4th goal to seal all 3 points for Klemoski's squad. A deserved win. Yong Kus, personally, I still think is the real man of the match, although the 4 new recruits shone. And let's hope it's really a start of a more consistent Harimau Malaya team, although I do believe the local fans are going to have some gripes over the fewer and fewer local born players being included in the starting 11, never mind being on the bench or in the final 23-man squad when it comes to match day. But Yong Kus has shown that he's going to become a very integral figure for Klemoski, both in defense and particularly a lot more in attack, compared to the more defensive-minded posture that he has to take under Kim Pang-gon, as he marshaled the defense to keep them tight even against tougher opponents in the past couple of years. But this time, he's going to be one of the hidden real threats going forward, beyond the usual suspects in Arif Aiman, or even the two new foreign-born attackers, or Endrick, or even Paulo Jose, who is an unused sub tonight. Tiong Khoo is by far the biggest surprise, with his wide-ranging attacking capabilities that paved the way for a comprehensive Harimau Malaya victory over Vietnam, the biggest win over their opponents in history, their first win in more than 10 years, and it also contributed to Vietnam's biggest loss against a Southeast opponent in 25 years. Kim Sang-sik will be scratching his head, and those shell-shocked Vietnamese will be wondering, what's next? After winning the ASEAN Championship last year, now they are going back to square one, with their minds still befuddled over what had hit them like a dozen gallons of like a truck that has run over them with impunity. And while the Vietnamese continue to scratch their heads over what to do next to get their Asian Cup qualifying campaign back on track, for Malaysia it has been a perfect start so far in this phase. 2 games, 2 wins, with upcoming games against Laos and Nepal next for the rest of this year, and getting those 3 points against them is not going to be an issue. I do believe Malaysia's visit to Vietnam in March 2026 could be the final decider, even though Malaysia currently hold a massive 4-goal advantage over their vanquished opponents in head-to-head tiebreaker in particular. So for Harimau Malaya, it's a deserved win to wrap up a satisfactory international break this month. And for Vietnam, back to the drawing board. Maybe it may prompt Vietnam to suddenly be as aggressive as Indonesia and Malaysia, and I think perhaps even previously Philippines, Thailand, to do similar naturalization processing to get themselves up to speed over their regional rivals who are already doing this. But it could lead to a potential scenario where it could be a bit of an arms race to see who can get the better heritage players or naturalized players to strengthen to make it the best national team ever. And I think, as a reminder to wrap up the whole analysis, getting the heritage players does help to improve the quality of the national teams without a doubt. But as it's shown in Indonesia's huge loss over Japan earlier this evening in the World Cup qualifiers, having them is not sufficient if the opponents are still at a much higher level than those of those heritage players or naturalized players that they have gotten. It still requires the local bonds, the local football ecosystem to push the whole thing up. Like how Arif Aiman feels very challenged and motivated to play because of these quality foreign-born players in front of him, that he's able to thread those passes to the players who can read what he's thinking, what he's trying to do, and how they're going to move. And this is where this revolution, Harimau Malaya revolution, is going on. We may see a similar path going on ahead, where perhaps you can see Southeast Asian national teams pushing closer and putting up very fierce competitions, not just against your fellow regional opponents, but also against other sub-confederations like South Asia, and particularly in the Middle East. And that's where it gets very interesting. But still at this moment, Tanya Harimau Malaya for their comprehensive second half victory. Good pole position in Group F, one step closer to back-to-back qualifications for the Asian Cup, but the work is still not done yet. Not just about the new recruits, the 5 new recruits, but also how are they going to ensure that the local bonds are not totally marginalized in this process. Arif Aiman is safe, but the others, I think this is where there's still food for thought for them. Otherwise, the rival fans will be laughing and say, what, Argentina C, like how they have spoken about Indonesia's Netherlands B, C, whatever, or Brazil and all that, yeah. And imagine that kind of online banter, to put it politely, social media banter that could reach to these proportions. But otherwise, it's pleasing to see Malaysia taking a major step in the right direction towards qualification for Asia, and they can relax in peace until the next round of Asian Cup qualifiers in September and October. Until then now, they can really enjoy their off season now.